I'm Frank, and my very best buddy here to talk about the Canadian Football League, David Morassutti. An interesting week for me. I had a chance to sit 2.5 hours with head coaches, general managers, assistant general managers, talking about the combine, and also nobody could resist asking questions about teams in particular, about issues. My favorite was, well, the first question that I liked to ask was the Argos were second, so we know a little bit about them. And my question about, so how are they insulating their starting quarterback? And Ryan Dinwiddie said, Bo Levi Mitchell, McLeod Bethel Thompson is three named quarterbacks. McLeod Bethel Thompson wouldn't necessarily have been the starting quarterback.
Yeah, that was an interesting take because everyone kind of assumed that the veteran would get the job, but I think also a belief in the Argos minds that they didn't want to fall under maybe past problems or mistakes that were made of always relying on the veteran when you might have younger. I'm not going to say better options, but younger options that frankly could have kept the Argos in a better spot, and they might have still been with the Argos right now, in my opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. I gotta say, when he said that, I actually wasn't surprised. Um, we do know one thing about Ryan Dinwiddie is that it doesn't matter your profile when you come into camp doesn't guarantee that you get the starting job. We saw that in his reign. We saw it. McLeod Bethel Thompson wasn't the top number one quarterback going into camp the first 2 years. Last year was the first time that he was actually going in the number one quarterback, and he maintained that. That was the first time in the 3 years that Ryan Dinwiddie has been here that the odds-on favorite, I'll phrase it that way, to be quarterback was eventually the starting quarterback.
Yes, no, that's definitely true, and I think this is going to become more of a trend. I mean, look, have we ever thought about Bo Levi Mitchell ever losing the starting quarterback job in Calgary? Did we ever think that was going to happen? It happened,
Yep.
right?
I mean, you knew it was going to happen eventually, but it kind of happened almost overnight.
Yeah. Well, look at even when Michael Riley was with the BC Lions, he was benched in favor of some kid named Nathan Rourke, if I'm
Hmm.
not mistaken. Like, I think teams, because you know what, sometimes it's, oh, we're paying this quarterback X amount of money, we got to get them, we have to go with our guy. But
Right.
there's also a belief of, you don't want to be putting yourself in a position where you're choosing the player over the team, right? And I think that's the situation we're coming to now. Look at what the Hamilton Tiger Cats. They they basically decided we had to go with the team over the player when it came to Dane Evans, when it came to Jeremiah Mazzoli. You know, look at the Montreal Alouettes. They had Vernon Adams, who was in his prime, and they said, we don't think he's enough. We're gonna go with Trevor Harris, the veteran, because it's what's best for the team and not necessarily what's best, for Vernon Adams Jr. Obviously.
Well, here's the thing with Montreal. So I'll prop up some information for folks to chew on. That was, if you haven't seen the video of it, these are highlight kind of quotes that I picked up while we were doing the thing. And what I liked from Jason Moss is he is familiar with Fajardo. So it's kind of funny. They both came from Saskatchewan to Montreal, and he did feel that familiarity is helpful. And by definition, why he likes his quarterback is because he's smart, accurate, and tough. Which to me that describes him perfectly, right?
Oh, it certainly does, and that's something that has been known for the last little bit, and it's those types of qualities that teams like in a way, right? It's what they want to see. So yeah, no, it's not that all surprising, and if people are surprised, they really haven't been paying attention at all.
A couple of consistencies throughout all the general managers in that meeting was the fact that they're not they're not they're not it seemed most of them anyway, because nobody owned up and said no, we're drafting for a position. They all basically said it all came down to we're going to draft the best player available when it's our turn. That's what they're going to do. I find that a little surprising because in the Canadian Football League, this draft, right? I believe you're not going to really draft for this year, except for maybe the first, and if maybe you're lucky, the second round. I don't think, David, when you get into the third round, you're really drafting. So it's obvious they're drafting the best player possible because you're not really drafting for this year. You're drafting for the next 2, 3 years.
Yeah, no, that's if you look at what there are players that can have an impact right away, but when it comes, but that's usually like special teams. But then when you look at where teams want them to project to be, it's going to take some time for the most part. Some of them can contribute here and there, but when it comes to being an everyday CFL player, starting, a starting player, not just on special teams, yeah, that's gonna take two. I say two, like by the second year, you might see some of these players go up. But yeah, for the most part, you're not going to see them right away unless they came from a very prominent college team and didn't get to the NFL and they're coming to the CFL and they've already got that pedigree. For that, some of these players, it takes some time, and a lot of the players, if you ask players who have played in the CFL, they say it's still an adjustment whether you've played high level football in the NFL, NCAA. There's an adjustment period that comes playing the CFL. So just imagine how much tougher it will be for some of these younger players.
Yeah, especially if they haven't played Canadian football. That's a given. Another thing that I found interesting. I don't know whether it was specific to this year or is it a general statement that the coaches and GMs feel. A couple of them pointed out the fact that the most precious position right now in the Canadian Football League is kicker and punter beyond the quarterback. They don't change hands much, David. And that's a key component in a draft where they can draft kickers that maybe they'll be able to use. They don't change hands often. If one comes up available in free agency, they disappear right away.
Yeah, no, I mean we've realized how crucial the kicking game can be in the NHL, I mean, in the CFL, because kicking didn't usually end up being a big part of a game. It was crucial. You had to make the kicks, but we hadn't seen the volume of kicks maybe than we have seen the last few years, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. But it's also punts. A player that can do both. We're starting to see teams now get specialty punters because field position has become the biggest battle in the CFL. If you can limit field position, that is huge. Um, that's huge for especially for offenses instead of having to drive all the way down the field. If their returner can give them some good yardage, that makes it easier for the offense. So other teams are like, well, if we can do well on the punt and keep and pin them deep, their chances of them being able to sustain a long drive becomes that much tougher.
I I totally agree, and it's important. It's important that like you said, field position means everything, and also um, the way the kicking game has gone the past couple of years. We've seen some games hinge on an attempt at a field goal or a single point. So whether it's the kicker or the punter, both have had impacts on games directly and have been basically the straw that stirs the drink.
No, it really is, and we have seen more teams go for those long kicks than we've seen in the past too, because coaches, they believe that the players are kickers are capable, but even if the kicker misses it, if the coverage is good, we can keep it deep. Although Ryan Dinwiddie would disagree with that assessment.
I would disagree with that too. I just it just seems that the further you are away, the harder it is for coverage to make it on time. That's that, and I think that's an issue that is dependent on the confidence of the special teams coach coordinator on how quickly his team can get down there. Yeah, that's I don't disagree. I don't agree. I just see some some interesting situations in there. Another issue that came out of the Hamilton meet and greet was um, I heard from them that analytics and statistics are important, but I actually heard somebody volunteer the fact that the interviews and the way a player handles themselves in the interview can actually override almost anything that happens at the combine.
It's quite interesting because we hear about the questions that are asked in interviews sometimes, and we're like, what's the point of the interviews if you're going to ask some bizarre questions? But it really gives, because you don't get a chance to talk to these players a lot, right? You don't get a chance to understand how they are up here, right? You see what they can do on the field physically, you can see what they can do at different points in the game. But how do they assess the game up here? That's what these interviews are supposed to do. Are they a mature? What's the maturity of this player? What's their personality like? Can this person work with the culture that the team is building, right? Be a part of that. We hear the word culture a lot, right? And that's something these interviews try to find out. Can this player fit into our system and take the direction, or take the direction we want them to go? Can they follow along with what we're saying?
Yeah, Sean Burke used the word culture, and and the way he used the culture word was he said, "We want to draft players who can fit into the Ottawa Red Blacks culture," and his culture later he talked about aggressively tough players. So he's looking for toughness, he's looking for meanness, he's looking for another Simone Lawrence is what he's looking for, and if he can get that, that's what he thinks is important, and that's he's being totally upfront about it. He wants his team to be tough. They want to be tough to be played against. And you know what? Not the first time I've heard that plan.
No, no, it's not, and it's not going to be the last time either,
Not at all.
right? I mean,
Smash mouth football. They got a phrase for it.
yeah, no, exactly, right. And it does well for some teams. It doesn't necessarily always work out, but yeah, I know it's just another one of those all evaluating tools, right? Just another way to see if that player can really fit into exactly what this team wants them to do. It's crazy. I haven't heard Smouth. You hear it all the time, but you don't hear always in the right context. I'll say that.
Well, that's what I think he's looking for, and it's football. It's part of football. Toughness and being aggressive is part of football. As long as you don't cross the line, that's that's what the rules are there for. So the rules take care of that part of the equation. Another thing that came up, and maybe we'll spend a little more than a minute on this one, David. Players um, are letting all the teams know that they have interest in playing in more than one league. So even if they come to the Canadian Football League, they're coming in suggesting, listen, we don't just want to play in the Canadian Football League. So, in other words, they want to play in one of those other leagues and the Canadian Football League. Now, I don't know, we know what the story is with the NFL, right? But we really haven't heard anything about the USFL and the XFL and about Canadian Football League teams and how they feel about that. At least in the sense that, do they want to give up the opportunity of having players play who are good enough to play for their team and not cancel them because they're playing for the XFL or the USFL?
Yeah, and like I get that too because for players they want to maximize their earnings, right? CFL players do play a lot. They play more than some other leagues, right? 18 games, that's a lot of games plus, if they play in the preseason as well, playoffs, Grey Cup, all those things. It's a lot of games. If
23, if my math's right. 18 plus 3 is 21 and 2. Yeah, 23 games. You can play as many as 23 games in a year.
Yeah. Whether I mean most likely those players aren't playing all those games, but I'm just wondering, do the players consider the health benefits, the impact it can have on their health because it's a lot on the body. There's a reason why football players can't play a lot of games. There's a reason why you need a certain amount of days between games to play before between practice, and I mean obviously practice plays a role, but there's also a reason why teams don't practice 5 days a week and they have to do these walkthroughs and stuff. It's a lot on the body. But I also think that some of these players are like, well, if I'm not going to play for it to a very late age, I might as well maximize as much of my earnings.
Yeah, all I can say is as long as they're playing for two leagues, as long as both the leagues are okay with covering them in case they're injured. In the Canadian Football League, it's only one calendar year that your insurance and or your health care is taken care of. In the Canadian Football League, I don't know what it'll be for the XFL or USFL. That's one of the I think that's one of the issues that I'm not here to look for problems, but I'm sure the CFL and the other leagues aren't really interested in signing a player who got hurt somewhere else and then doesn't know it, and they come in, whatever anyway. So there's that issue as well, because health is always a concern with football players.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like you also wonder if the CFLPA wants that for the players as well, right? They have to look out for the best interest of the players.
And
And
who doesn't? Most of us, I think most people
yeah,
feel the same way, that these guys should be taken care of. If they're injured on the job, just like anybody else in the world, you're working the job, you get injured on the job. We'd all like to think that people who are injured at work are taken care of, so that, you know, that they're okay, whether it be financially or health wise. It's both the same thing and both need to be respected.
no, it's so true. It's very true.
So G. Roy Simon sat in with Chris Jones, and I talked to you a little bit about this before this show. I talked to you about this a little bit after the event happened and in between as well. A very interesting subject matter took place. Besides the fact, I think I'll say this to start. Edmonton has 5 picks in the first 28, and I think that tells us that this draft is very important to them, and they have picks they could trade if teams want certain players. So they have the opportunity, and Chris Jones has made it clear that he is neither going to hang on to the pick or get rid of it. He's open to any suggestion that someone might make. It's all a question of what the dangle is, if I can use that term.
No, for sure. And it's an envious position for some GMs because if they feel that this draft is a deep draft and they're better off getting quantity over maybe that one player, by all means, they should go and do it because we've seen how important it is to have established Canadian depth in your lineup, and most of the time it's who you draft that's going to determine that, right? Um, that's what Winnipeg's been able to do the last few years. That's what Calgary has done. You look at the teams that have been there year after year after year after year. It's the way that they draft players, and drafting players not just in the first few rounds. It's later in the draft as well. And you know what? Maybe for Edmonton, it's like, what if we pick a player and all of a sudden it's not the right player or something doesn't go right? That's something that has to all be weighed in when they make these deals.
Now, my favorite topic, waiting to talk about this from the moment that I heard it, and got on the phone with a well-known sports reporter, and I
Wasn't
said,
me, by the way.
did you?" Well, second most famous sports reporter I know. Did you hear that? And I got the response, yeah. And you know what? What happened was we were talking about players and bringing players in, and somehow it took a turn. It wasn't a sharp turn, but it was a turn, a direction. And talking about drafting players and convincing them to come and play in the Canadian Football League. And we all know that our league is half American, right? And we also are ground into the ground told that the better players are the American players. Having said that, now those players that are playing in college, name, image, and likeness is now an opportunity, a business tool, if you will, for all the players to sell their own name, their own image, and their own likeness. In other words, they can sign contracts to be sponsored and or do anything, right? So the first thing that came out of my head, and you can say what from your end, the first thing that came out of, oh my goodness, you got guys, or you got a quarterback who's making $1 million NIL. You have other players, if they're making $250,000, might be making that. Some might be making $100,000. I'm still not down to the level of a starting contract in the Canadian Football League. That's $75,000. Now, this isn't a negative thing about the Canadian Football League. This is about how and what does the Canadian Football League do in this regard because of this? How is this impacting on the way players A are drafted, B are searched for, looked for, and offered contracts?
Yeah, and it's brought up this belief, in my opinion, that where the CFL has really hurt itself is not having that Canadian really getting that upbringing of Canadian talent. Because guess what? Now we're starting to see Canadian talent see the benefits of more of the benefits of playing in the States. More Canadian players are being looked at more than ever in the NFL, and the NFL draft has possibilities. But it's also just that eventually these players are going to say, maybe we can find something better than the CFL. Maybe there's something better off for the CFL, which I have no problem with. Look, you only get so many years to play football. Go and maximize your earnings wherever you can. All for that. But it's why the CFL needs to ensure that the pipeline within your own country. I understand the global market. I understand they want to make that a pipeline too. But it's the pipeline in your own backyard that the majority of your players come from. You have to make sure that that is taken care of. And what I mean by taken care of, situations like this, where you know what, maybe certain NFL players are going to be like, certain NCAA players are going to be like, you know what, I just don't think the CFL is the right move for me next. And you know what, you heard Chris Jones say it. Agents aren't putting this money now into their players for them to be like, you know what, I'm going to settle for the Canadian Football League. They don't want that.
Just for the sake people understand, uh, Chris Jones raised specific numbers. He said you get an agent that spends $20,000 to $30,000. That $75,000 contract really does shrink. And don't forget, there's some of that money goes to an agent or whatever. So the money that they make isn't helpful. But I brought this thing up on one of our shows with Aaron on Candid Frank Live, and Aaron brought up a really interesting point, David. I should call Aaron, have him do it himself here, because I'm very proud of the comment that he made. You know, I really was impressed, actually, and maybe I'm overly impressed because I like the guy. Maybe I'm playing favorites, but he said, you know, another thing could be that you get that quarterback that's making $1 million NIL, finishes college. He needs a venue, to maintain, if you will, an influencer as a football player. There's something that could happen in the Canadian Football League, and we'll see if that's possible. Now, Aaron, imagine what Aaron was saying. Imagine, David, you have a very popular player signing in the Canadian Football League, bringing in 100,000 or whatever. You know what I mean? Followers. The Argos kept a guy around who they didn't really play, who had a lot of influencers. He didn't play much, but they kept him on the team. And why do you think they kept him on the team? Just to raise the profile of the team and the league. And in a way, I think there could be a real handshake between the Canadian Football League and these players, certain players, that they could help, to raise the profile of the Canadian Football League. You bring in 7 or 8 players of that kind of quality that have a lot of people that they're, because if someone's paying them $1 million, they have people who they are. I mean, one of the stories that always reverberates in my head is when I hear people from the U.S. who finally watch Canadian football and they say, "Oh, I remember Ricky Ray. That's where he's playing." And you can insert a million different names in there over the time, not a million, but quite a few names in there that the Canadian Football League have players that have a lot of popularity, whether it's in the SEC, whether it's in, on the West Coast, whether it's Northeast, or whether it's center of the US. They have a name that they can keep alive and maintain that influencer status by maintaining their football playing, right? Which I think is mutually beneficial. I don't know. You're the gambling guy. You're the guy that understands new streams. That's just something. When Aaron said that, that really.
Look, when you people underestimate those cities in the US that don't have NFL teams. There's a reason why the college teams are so popular, because that's all they have. If you went to a CFL fan in Toronto and you told them, "Did you know that DeVars Daniels played for Notre Dame, one of the most prestigious NCAA schools?" Many would have had no idea. If I told you, I mean, there's a reason why Chad Kelly gets so many headlines right now, because obviously who his uncle is, but also in his own right, because as a player, he was a pretty decent college player that got, he had a pretty prominent college career, and a lot of people follow that. It's got a lot of eyes on them, and so that's something that can't be overlooked. That you can't overlook that when you see why players are deciding, okay, you know what, let's try to get that money, and why they go to certain schools in the States now, right? The decision day takes a whole new meaning with these new deals. And it's why a lot of these schools didn't want these deals in the first place, because they can't compete. They simply cannot compete with what a lot of these other schools. You look at what George. I'm going to bring in. This is my understanding of NCAA football. You got Georgia, Alabama. You've got
The SEC
Michigan. I'm just
and
looking in schools, right? Like the Ohio State, Clemson. Like there's certain schools that now, grant
Purdue.
some players will be smart to say, if I can be a star at this school, I'll go there. But some players are just like, if I'm a part of a good team and I can have any role on this really good team, it's going to benefit me for sure.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is it's not just about profile. It's about improving your profile through being on a good team. And now the thing that happens, and I'm sorry if we just hijack this into college football issues in the U.S., but now you can, there's no waiting a year anymore if you want to change schools. That was a deterrent, that if you wanted to change schools in college football, you had to sit out a year. Well, that rule's gone. You can go from one school to the other. So not only can you get paid or look for NIL money, you can go somewhere where you may think it's in your best interest to, based on NIL money that you can make. So it's another complication that basically gives players another opportunity or an option, and that's what's going on here. Is that football players? I can see college football players who make enough money to invest in themselves if they're business minded, if they have ideas, some things that they learned in college, and now they don't have to worry whether it's seed money for whatever it is that they're doing after football. They don't have to play football to get that seed money. They didn't have to pay to go to school. They get their education. And then once they get their education, while they're playing, they can gather up some money and use that as seed money into maybe something they're planning on doing because they don't want to beat up their body anymore. They're not forced. One of the main reasons people forget that the majority of football players are African American are because most of them going back came from poor areas where they needed the opportunity for their family's sake to make some money so that they could buy, for example, a house for mom, that kind of stuff. And we've seen also players who have gone into the pool, the draft, because they wanted to advance and help their family. They needed to make the money. They didn't finish college because the best way to make money then was to get into the draft. Now there won't be that much pressure. Not that it won't happen, but now there's money to be made before they get there. And the kind of like $1 million, you could buy a decent house in the U.S., especially
Yeah.
if you come from SEC territory.
Do you not remember when James Wilder Jr., whose
Hmm.
father had a very prominent NFL career,
Absolutely.
decided he wasn't going to play in the CFL because the money didn't make sense for him. Right? He felt he was better off working a normal job in the States, because in the CFL it was tough to make a living
But
and
that
support
statement
a
is
family.
tainted. He ended up in the CFL again
Yeah, he
anyway,
ended up going to the
right? So,
CFL.
that
He
statement
ended
does.
up, funny enough, he signed a deal, got a signing bonus, then didn't get he didn't have to give that back.
Now he's not playing now because he got injured.
Yeah, unfortunately, his playing career was taken away because of because of injury. So that is and that. But again, that's something the players think about. They can't play this game forever. They can't, and that's why. And that's why I even supported college athletes, because you look at how much money the NCAA makes off of these players. They're
So
not making them. Yes, because of the school and traditions, but the profile that these players and the quality of players they have give them the players deserve a cut.
absolutely, and David, the fact remains: the sport is so popular, everybody knows about it. Everybody knows what they pay for tickets. Information is out there about how much colleges make because of football. Information is out there how much football players make in college. Zero. Now all of a sudden they make something. We know decent, thoughtful people understood that college players that are playing 3 and 4 years, they're sacrificing their bodies for the hope of at the end of those 3 or 4 years, they're drafted into the NFL and they're signing a major contract. But even the NFL itself has changed as far as sharing income with the players. The salaries have gone, I don't know if I could say this, but I'll say it, and they've literally gone through the roof. The salaries in the NFL over the past few years. Contracts were not that much, and they weren't guaranteed. Now there's a lot of guaranteed money that's being offered by teams to players. I understand it starts with the quarterbacks, it was with the running backs, now the receivers, big end defensive players, but it's trickling down to all the players on the team who are making much more money than they made before. So the necessity to play football when you're injured or when your health is threatened there isn't as much pressure for you to play, which I'm grateful for. For the players' sake, the human side of this, they should be they should be paid a lot of money. They're the ones that put up the risk. It's not the owners, it's not the coaches, it's not anybody else in the football world, if you will. It's the players. So whatever they can get, that's available to them for them to get, then they need to see what they can do about getting it. So I don't begrudge them it as well. I agree with you.
Yeah, no, it's just not an easy situation for these players to be in. Um, I always, when people always give the argument about players not making money in college. I'm just like, how do you support yourself going to college? Now, I understand some of these people that go to college have to work jobs, sometimes 2 to 3 jobs to pay for things. College football players were in a similar situation, from what I know. Well, not maybe not as many of the star ones, but uh, just it's
Generally speaking, you're speaking generally, because the reality is, David, for every quarterback that makes $5 million, there's probably 4 or 5 quarterbacks that don't make, you know, a million or near that. And
yeah.
we're only talking about the ones in the league. And then let's talk about, how many football players there are and how many of them make the NFL. So it's this is the thing with pro sports, right? A lot of people want to play the game, but not many of them get invited to play.
Yeah, no, for sure. And maybe even makes more players, maybe more people who are good at football think maybe I'll actually play football in college. Because some players may not think they're good enough, or some players may be like, you know what? I'm just gonna get there and I'm just gonna use it to get my education and not really think about the football part. But if they think that there's money attached to it, it's interesting. And how many more Canadians also will maybe think about going to NCAA schools over Canadian schools because of this NIL as well?
Oh, that's another. The bottom line is there's money available within the college ranks in the U.S. And that money is something that every player is going to hope they can get a piece of, and no one can blame them. But just like I said about how many players in the league, how many quarterbacks make 20, 30 million. There's a lot more quarterbacks that make a million. In college, there's going to be players that get NIL contracts of substance. But then there's going to be a lot of them that might get NIL contracts that are not that much, and then even more that don't get an NIL contract at all. So name, name, image, and likeness is a lot of money, but it doesn't exactly get spread out amongst all the players. If you remember, before the NIL agreement happened, there was talk about a base salary for all the football players. You notice that disappeared, right?
Yep.
Remember, it was going to be how much are we going to? What's the base salary for college players? It never happened. It's not the. It's not. It's not a capitalistic way to do things,
No, not at all.
right? So it's the best people get the most money, and in some cases, get all the money.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's just it's such a tough thing nowadays. But what worked in the past, unfortunately, it just doesn't work. It doesn't really work much any no in today's well in the way today things are viewed today.
Calgary's the only team that had one guy sitting in the chair at the table,
It's interesting, huh?
and it was not Craig. Sorry, um, Dave Dickinson. Thinking Saskatchewan. Dave Dickinson sat alone, and I asked him about Canadian quarterbacks and his dedication to having Canadian quarterbacks. You know, and he said, "I love Canadian quarterbacks. I think we should support Canadian." Very, he's very, he promotes Canadian quarterbacks. He promotes Canadian players, and he made it clear that he still feels that way, but he wouldn't tell me if there was a quarterback that he might be interested in. Mind you, there's only one available this year, one that basically is on the list that could be drafted. The other thing that they had to do a little housekeeping is they had to give up a second round pick because they drafted in the supplemental draft last year, so they gave up a second round draft pick. And then he said what everybody else said, best player. But he said something. The new system, they offered game like situations to test the players. He said something, a very compassionate thing. He talked about, I really don't care how well they do there. I just want them to be safe, to play safe, to not get hurt. I don't want to see any players get hurt. He was almost saying he doesn't like the idea. In fact, actually, if you add up all the words, that's what it adds up to. He was very considerate and thoughtful of the players. He didn't want to see them get injured. How do you feel about the new system for the draft and for the combine that leads to the draft?
It's interesting because even the Argos coach Pete Costanza,
Hmm.
um, he's running the offense. He's running how the play. He's getting a firsthand look at the offensive players, which I'm surprised because you would think that maybe they just find a retired coach to do it because I wonder how many teams might complain about a team's coaching personnel having that firsthand look of the players.
But David, who shows up there? The money they spend and the coaches they bring to the combine counts against the cap.
That's interesting. It is
It
an
counts against the cap. I learned that in these interviews as well.
one advantage it does have though. You get to see these players in the Canadian scope of the
Yeah.
combine, right? Like it's truly the Canadian game
And in
that
this case, Edmonton was the host, so the Edmonton coaches, the expenses to bring them in was not that difficult. Just like it wasn't, as Saskatchewan reminded me of their combine
yeah.
experience
Yeah, so I
last.
they but one thing about the combine, I wish you would know more from what's going on at the combine. Um, a network should be picking that up just like it does now. The issue here is the CFL doesn't have a dedicated,
Channel.
24-hour network like the NFL network does that you can have that draft, the combine
They
picked
have
up.
the website. They do some stuff in the
They used
website.
to do it live. And I just don't know. Do they feel that the amount of time and investment wasn't worth it based on how many people were watching? I think it's worth it for those who can't be there to watch it. Right now, maybe that's what
Why
they
do you think
want.
that is? And I don't mean to interrupt you because that's the question. Like you said, why they don't do it? Is it they're fearful of they can't create a good enough um, uh, production value so that if they do it, it works against them more than it works for them because it doesn't look that good. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that even if they had really quick, even if they had just a couple of cameras with a couple of angles where the fans could see those cameras. They don't have to be beauty shots. They don't have to follow the players. But if you could log in and have a look at these players, and if at least you knew who they were, there was a program there or something, the numbers, a list of players, who's coming up next, who's going to do this. I guess I don't know if I guess at the end of the day, it's all about how much bang will they get for their buck, even though the buck isn't that much.
This is where I feel like the CFL has underestimated people's interest in the combine and the draft because I feel like they're missing and you're looking for content, right? As a league to promote and to market. Combine and draft is the I'm sorry to say it for the NFL, it's their biggest ticket of the year.
And engagement, because what you're talking about is
Yes.
engagement.
You could talk about the Super Bowl all you want. In my opinion, nothing gets everybody going like the NFL draft. The combine, the actual draft itself. I feel like that's a missed opportunity there. It is a missed opportunity from the CFL, in my opinion, to not have these events on display for everybody to see and to witness and to enjoy and to say, look at all the great things that this league can offer. Because the XFL, USFL, they don't have these. The CFL hosts these events. They
Yeah.
have these events. It really, and you bring up the idea just having a couple of cameras. That's not a lot to ask for. A couple of cameras, plug it in, stream live.
On a joystick.
You don't even you can have it stationary,
No,
as you said.
no stationary, but
Yeah.
in case when they relocate and they do something somewhere else, because what happens is when they go through all the drills, you set up for each drill. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah. So and you hook up the mic to whoever's at the actual combine announcing who's going up, the times. That's all you need to do. You don't need to do that much, but maybe they feel like having it as a not so great setup, maybe not to the standard that they want isn't worth having it at all? I don't know. All I'm going to say is that it's a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity that the draft could be such a much bigger thing. The combine could be a much bigger thing, and your league has some discussion in these dog days of winter, in these months where fans are they're in hibernation mode right now. They're just saying when's May, right? When's May? When
Yeah.
does camp start?
Is it May yet?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, for me, I don't feel as spurned about the combine as maybe you do. I also I do though agree that it would be great if they had yeah, just a camera there, just showing what's going on, so CFL fans could check it out. But I guess there's a determination made, and usually the determinations, especially when it comes to professional leagues, they basically work on statistics, not just on how many passes a quarterback, makes. They have other statistics of interest in fans. Do fans love Thursday night football? Do they prefer Sunday over Saturday? What is the combine drawing as far as interest from our fans? Are they engaging? Where do the fans want to engage that we're not engaging them? For a time, it was a football, computer game. It was that. Why don't we have that? They got one, and that conversation, slowly disappeared. Gambling, a very important function of the Canadian Football League now. Um, you know, with Genius, they're in their, I guess it's now third year. Yeah, I think it's third year. They're in their third year with the Canadian Football League, developing all kinds of data and points where CFL fans have engaged in one way, where that information is gathered, as you know how it works, and then it ends up in a pool that of course, the net, if you will, of, and I don't mean by internet, the net, the web, whatever. So you don't mean it there like that either. But the point is, they catch all people's information, and then they keep track of those people. If they're buying a jersey, whose jersey are they buying? What player? What team? How often are they spending money here? Should we send them more information that tells them about another opportunity, whether it be ticks or an opportunity to meet the player, or a story about that specific player? All that stuff takes time. The Canadian Football League is 3 years in with Genius, and they're developing all that information, and that's coming. So they haven't turned their back on that. We might not have seen yet the best part of that relationship between the Canadian Football League and Genius. So as far as the combine's concerned, do people care? Do people want to see it? If more people say that, hey, can we see more about the combine, then maybe it'll happen. But my issue in support of what you're saying is, how do they know who wants to see it? How do they know how much interest there is, if there's zero interest, or zero stuff available, right? It's great. We did the combine thing. I'm editing the stuff and producing it, and I'm going to pump it all out a team at a time. It's a lot of work, but I'll get it done. My next team to go out will be what happened with the Argonauts, and then I'll move to the next team, and I'll put that stuff all out there. But the question is, how much interest is there in that information? Do people want to hear that kind of stuff? Like, what is it that the Canadian Football League fan needs to feel engaged? And more importantly, as you've said all along, and we both agree, how do you bring in people who aren't CFL fans right now?
Yeah, exactly. And there's I think the CFL at times needs to understand that there's different types of fans. Yes, you got your casual fans, or you got your fans that are gonna ones that care just about the game, going to the game, and maybe don't read too much into what's going on in and out around the teams and all those things. But then you got the super nerds, the ones you need to feed the content to, or those that love it for other leagues and will love to have that information on the CFL. You have to feed the beast a little bit there. And I wonder if Genius will, because they're taking a lot, as you mentioned, they're taking a lot of advice from Genius and what they recommend. And I really do wonder if we will start to see the CFL start to do these things that many fans are looking for.
Absolutely. We're winding down to the last couple of minutes of the show. What we also learned is that we have teams. We're all asked. They were pretty much all asked by one reporter in particular. So, who do you think did the best in free agency?
Well,
My answer to that question, and you can answer it too after I do. My answer to that question is you really don't know who did really well in the draft. Actually, sorry, in free agency,
until the end of
just
the
as
year.
we didn't know until the Grey Cup.
Yeah. So it all depends, in my opinion, of what were the teams looking to do. Should the team that made the most changes be the winners of free agency, or the ones that, because really, Winnipeg has been the best team in free agency the last few years because they continually keep that roster and bolster that roster to get them to the Grey Cup every year. They
And
probably
did you say keep? Did I hear you
keep.
say keep? Yes, yes, yes.
Now, I've heard a lot of buzz about the Hamilton Tiger Cats and
Being very
how
busy.
they've been very busy. That's not necessarily always a good thing, but if they remake their team and they come out strong, they could be the team that wins free agency just because they're finally taking that. They realize we got to go for it. Like,
They have a veteran quarterback.
we have a
Let's be
veteran
clear.
quarterback. They brought back. They made some key additions on defense. Jaguar Davis is back. Chris
Yeah.
Edwards left Toronto to go to Hamilton.
Chris Edwards, the guy that went after the Hamilton Tiger Cat fan. I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, yeah. He's. I think that
I think that's
relationship.
hilarious.
I think a counseling session might have to go there.
No, I think you have that fan that will come to and go, "Hey, good for you joining us." It's
So
just a football. It's a football thing. It's not a
I would
person.
I would say the teams in the East were certainly a lot more busy in free agency than I think the West teams were, in my opinion. I do think Hamilton looks like a winner because they're pushing and they're going for it. But I'm going to reserve to my reservation saying that they're the clear winners just because it means nothing if they don't go to the Grey Cup and win it.
Yes.
Grey Cup or bust for that team, right?
Yes.
So that's where I
Yes.
stand with that.
Especially because they had a chance already just 2
Mhm.
years ago. And you know what? They could very well do it. And as I said, I meant it sincerely, and I mean it totally. When it comes to free agency, you really don't know if you're the winner because you don't know unless you make it to the Grey Cup, you win the Grey Cup, or your team makes a giant bit of improvement. Under those terms, you can call it a success. But you really have to look at a team like Winnipeg, and you brought up two very salient points. Who do you keep? Who don't you lose in free agency? Number one. Number two, who do you bring in? And as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter how many people you bring in if you bring in the right people. You know, two or three, free agency pickups could make a team that's really good a Grey Cup champ, or you know, make a team that's not playing very well playoff competitive. So as far as picking who's the best, I think it really is. It's free agency. The only way to judge it, I think, is hindsight.
Yeah, no, it's especially true. I'm of the belief that you know what? Do anybody have the Toronto Argonauts going to the Grey Cup? I thought there was a chance just based on the path in the East, but you look at what they did in free agency. They weren't flashy in many respects, but they knew what they wanted to go and get, and they went out and they got it. And
What
I'm wondering
what
if
they did was get experience.
yeah, and I'm wondering if that's what Hamilton's doing. If that's what Hamilton
Absolutely.
feels is what's gonna be the thing that works for them.
What is it? Jaguar Davis is going for his fourth Grey Cup in a row, fifth,
Yeah,
maybe
I
sixth.
think maybe it's 6.
Yeah, maybe sixth Grey Cup in a row.
Yeah.
He's won his Grey Cup. He won one in Calgary, won one in Toronto. He's been in Hamilton a couple of years. Took a little break to Toronto to win a Grey Cup, along with Banks. Now he's on his way back to Hamilton, hoping that he wins a Grey Cup there. That would mean that he could win a Grey Cup with three different teams. Not in succession, but
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, getting there is one thing, but now we're realizing you need the horses to get it up, to get it going there.
you need the lead horses too. You got to have the players that show the way. And this is a term we hear and we've heard in hockey, and it pertains in every sport. You need the players that get you to the playoffs. Then you need the players that'll win you the championship. So within that, there has to be a bit of both to get you to where you want to be. The Toronto Argonauts were fortunate last year to have a couple of players that really in that game made some incredible plays. They had players who played in that game who didn't do that well, but are the reason why the team finished first. And that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Hamilton just needs the same thing. They've got to have a roster of players for their free agency success. They need a roster of players that gets them to the playoffs and gets them to the Grey Cup, and then the players to win it for them. The one thing Hamilton has not had for too long, for too long, is they've had the players to get them to the Grey Cup, but they haven't had the players that'll get them past that hump known as the Grey Cup game. So that's something that free agency success, I think, with Hamilton will be defined by getting to the playoffs and winning that big game.
No, for sure. No,
And BC is the other team that I'm looking for validation, if you will. If you were to look at, not because they're cats just like the Tie Cats, but they're in the same kind of position, right? They're the team that maybe Saskatchewan even more. I don't know. The team that needs to do something for their fan base and for their organization.
yeah, no, it's especially true.
That have almost been there and haven't quite got there.
Hmm.
Well, David, this was fun.
It was definitely fun.
He's David Morassutti. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching us. We're here every Monday at 9 o'clock. The best we can, anyway. Life does get in the way sometimes. I hope you're getting all excited about the Canadian Football League. Is it May yet? Well, there's only 1 month in between then and now. And the excitement of talking football like I had this week was fantastic. It was refreshing. So thanks to the CFL for inviting me. And David, thanks for joining me here. As always, a great partner in talking Canadian Football League.
Always appreciate it, Frank.
Okay, if you want to watch any other stuff that we do, just check out Candid Frank Stanisci on YouTube. And we have a bunch of different programs there. You can check out Aaron and Gary as well. See you later, folks. Enjoy the rest of your evening.